Hi, welcome to my channel. I'm Erin Earth. I'm going to talk today about Naad sound, the spiritual sound substance that in meditation we often spend a lot of time listening to. And everything that I'm going to say today in this video you can find in my book, in the chapter of Naad hearing, chapter 5, in sun gazing, aura seeing, and Naad hearing, available online. So this starts on page 73. This section is called Common Sound, Common Listening. We're going to just first talk about just common listening, ordinary listening. An ordinary sound comes and goes. We normally listen to such sounds with ordinary instinctual interest. Sound's vibration substance passes into our hearing equipment, where the information is delivered to certain mental equipment. Keep in mind that the mind and its equipment surround the core self or spiritual self on all sides. As the listener, the core self is normally only made aware of sounds relevant to survival of the physical body. The mind performs an interpretation maneuver for each and every vibration that enters into its hearing organ. In a single moment, the body can receive a sound wave, decipher the vibration package into sensible, relatable information, and come to a conclusion which is presented to the core self. The core self may falsely believe that it has made this determination on its own, but it has not. It cannot be overstated how important it is for the core self to accept that it has little control over this process. Now think of the sound of each of these. Rain and thunder. Squealing tires. Laughter. Firecrackers. A cat's meow. These are material sounds, natural sounds, originating by cause of some action in our environment. They may trigger certain, possibly inconsequential memory flashes. These sounds travel as waves of subtle material vibrating through the medium of air. If a hearing being is present, the sound package enters into the ears and into special sound receivers. These receivers are designed to process and deliver these vibrations to the observer's organ of intellect, which will then match them to related memory information. This elaborate process happens in a split second. Now let's talk about uncommon sound and uncommon listening. There is another kind of sound that we are not often familiar with. This sound can be mutually experienced by the physical and subtle ears. More importantly, however, is that it is of greatest interest to the core self. Yes, the observing inner self experiences this special sound the most relevantly, most profoundly. Even more important than the other psychic skills combined, Naad sound resonance takes us further. It is like a conveyor belt, picking up consciousness and allowing it to flow stable and smooth to the location of and eventual perception of the spiritual self. Naad isn't really a subtle thing the way auras and rainbows are. Naad is something much more. Its results are not limited to insight into subtle material nature. Rather, it offers a pure form of spiritual nourishment and energy. In my own experience, Naad sound listening is the most valuable of supernatural practices. Naad contains in itself the power to take us closest to our spiritual goals. For some, that place is a heaven, a paradise of spiritual living. Others call this freedom Samadhi. The next section is called Transmigration and Samadhi. Evolution tumbles the seemingly ignorant living being through an endless series of births and deaths. Eventually, the living being may take a human body. Within a human form, there may exist a potential for the development of an independent awareness, a sense of individuality or separation from the physical body. If insight deepens further, the living being may also recognize a feeling of separateness from the abstract mental environment as well. There may be a feeling of, this is not my body, and or this is not my mind. The living being may begin to wonder about itself, possibly coming to believe that it is a self, separate from the body-mind complex. The individual may begin to study itself using meditation or another psychological discipline. I would like to briefly touch upon the Sanskrit word samadhi. Common Western usage tends toward defining it as enlightenment, or more ambiguously, oneness with the divine. Samadhi is the 8th and final stage of traditional yoga. It means complete insight. This complete insight is achieved through efforts made in beginning and intermediate stages of yoga practice, which are moral restraints, recommended behaviors, body postures, breath infusion, sensual interest retraction. Body postures can be performed along with rapid breathing. This respiratory action causes an energy change out, chemically in the physical body and psychically in the subtle body. Heavy gases are removed while fresh oxygen is infused. As one practices, self-interest is pulled inward and applied to the practice. This is called pratyahara, the 5th stage of yoga, meaning sensual interest retraction. It is the beginning step of yogic psychological restraint. While applying postures and breathing, the mind is kept restrained. The wandering urges are effortfully suppressed. These efforts prepare the body and mind as an environment useful for meditation. Interest energy retraction, pratyahara, prepares the living being for self-reflection and eventually, in higher stages, divine association in meditation. Maintaining the foundational stages of yoga long-term may cause a step-by-step development of objectivity in meditation. What does it mean to be objective? In this context, it means to be independent from the influences of the mind and emotions. According to Patanjali, Samadhi is the final progression in the 3 highest stages of yoga. In Sanskrit, these 3 highest stages are collectively called Samyama, meaning complete restraint of the mind and emotion. And this is where Samadhi begins. Complete insight, or Samadhi, is not just one thing. It depends on the person experiencing it. It has different levels and different depths. It has beginning and ending stages. It is different for different people. Initial experiences of clear insight may happen for a single moment. These moments may lengthen in duration as practice progresses. It all depends on a person's level of advancement as well as their basic spiritual status. In the context of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, this blank insight These gaping states of clarity in between mental functions become themselves a means of perception. This clean, vritti-less, unconditioned insight is then used for study of various phenomena, such as, this is what the Yoga Sutras tells us. This is what Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras tells us that we should do with this Samadhi business. To study various phenomena such as time, language of all creatures, past lives, the mind and emotions of others, the solar system, the star system, the course of planets and stars, and the layout of the body. It is to my understanding that when highest samadhi is achieved, a whole new spiritual life begins. The self may experience states of consciousness completely outside the physical psychic system that is material creation. The Samyama Meditation sequence we apply in yoga is a spiritual conditioning program, readying the self for life in the spiritual world. Samadhi is when spiritual life really takes off. Of course, it is important to remember that just because one has attained a high level of spiritual insight does not mean it is guaranteed to last. Maintaining this level of insight requires great resolution and power. One of the keys to our success is our greatest friend in the here and now, finally, Naad sound. Back to Naad sound, resonance. It is this psychic exercise that we take most seriously and spend the most time with. For the core self, this sound becomes a companion, the ultimate friendly hand to hold. One of the many benefits of listening to Naad is that it rescues the core self from the functions of the mind. Again, Patanjali lists those functions as remembering, imagining, perceiving correctly or incorrectly, and sleeping. The two main harassing features or functions that Patanjali lists are the remembering stuff and the imagining stuff. Naad sound helps the meditator overcome these alluring activities of the mind. Naad, the eternal word, is not temporary. It is causeless and continuous, without beginning or end. Even when you are not aware of it, it is present. When one does become aware of it, it may suddenly seem like it won't go away. During the first part of my life, I certainly wasn't always comfortable with it, wasn't glad it was there. I often wished that silence was actually silent and not so strangely loud. My quiet life and a friendly sound. I grew up in a quiet little town, in a quiet home with quiet parents and one quiet sibling. Fate gave me the opportunity to experience much silence growing up. It was during these early days that I discovered silence to be anything but silent. Silence has a sound of its own. It is a sound of its own. When I first began hearing Naad, much as when I first saw an aura, I had no idea what it was. Similarly, just as the aura bothered my eyes, Naad sound bothered my ears. As a kid, I would ride my bike across town to the Catholic church my family attended. I would go during the week or on a Saturday so the church would be empty of people. The church doors were unlocked and prayer candles flickered in the sanctuary. With high ceilings and beautiful stained glass, I felt the genuine pleasure of something divine flood my head. The church didn't feel the same on Sundays when people were present. Alone, it was warm and welcoming. In this quiet, the sound of silence became unavoidable, a pleasurably magnetic, peaceful hum that seemed to be trying to draw me into a trance. Holding on. I didn't understand what I was hearing or feeling in that church at that time, but the rich softness of the sound expanded inward and outward, filling both me and the building. I was afraid that if I let myself follow the sound too far, I might lose track of myself. So I would listen only for so long before cracking my eyes and breaking the spell. I had no idea about the nature of the mind, so I kept a firm connection to my physical surroundings. I do sometimes wonder where I would have gone had I let go. I wonder, in such a young state of mind, what I was capable of. Needless to say, I know now that had I let go, no matter where I had gone, I would have returned to normal consciousness. For this reason, we should not fear meditation or Naad listening. This so-called normal consciousness is actually quite tricky to get away from. The mind snaps back to normal consciousness naturally, as it is programmed to do. Even if awareness is able to momentarily shift away from normal function, finding itself in an alternate environment, you can be sure it will return to its normal default position, right back in the head, right back into common reality. Family and reincarnation. As a youngster, I had some deep-seated issues that weighed on my mind and heart. I was an adopted child. The relationship continuum with my ancestors was severed just after my birth. This would be a shock to any newborn's psyche, as babies are very sensitive to the sounds, smells, and vibrations of their mother long before birth. If you know even a little history on Catholic adoption practices in this century, you may know that due to my birth mother's status, white, young, Catholic, and unwed, her chances of leaving the hospital with her child were little to none. Under the influence of the church, at the moment of birth, I was removed from my mother's presence despite her objections. In these situations where babies are marked for adoption, preventing even eye contact between mother and baby is strictly enforced. Within a week, I was placed in a family unrelated and unknown to my birth families. Many adoptees live lives as classified people, under contract to never know the identity, location, description, or history of their family of origin, unless the laws of the state change. Given a new identity and corresponding birth certificate, original birth certificates are sealed. I grew up blind to my past. I longed, just like anyone, to know where I came from and who I was, but I had no story. For me, looking into the past was like turning around to see a blank wall. Sometimes I was angry at that blank wall. I would figuratively write negative things on it. My absent past was my greatest vulnerability. It was a reason for me to be hard on myself, to somehow be embarrassed of myself. We don't realize how reliant the psyche is on the genetic link for recognition of its own physical identity. Without this separation experience, one might never realize how dependent the eyes of the mind are upon seeing faces of those it resembles. Spiritual lineage. In a spiritual way, many of us have lost our lineage. While using these bodies and engrossed in family affairs, we drift further and further away from the source identity. Our higher relationship with the ultimate mother and father can go unnoticed. Ashrams, monasteries, yoga, and other devotional practices provide lifestyle control for purposes of awakening the living being in order that it redirects its interest toward culling out its spiritual origins. Other events have this redirecting effect too. Life experience, also known as the school of hard knocks, can force our awareness into altered dimensions of reality as well. Experiencing genetic isolation caused me, personally, to be sensitive toward a more subtle history of time and lineage. I literally didn't have a past to distract me from a broader reality. How could it be that the separation of a mother and child, something so sensually sacred, could be motivation for a big step in growth? Could it be that the deeper purpose for me was the opportunity to study the nature of family and this couldn't possibly be done without a special perspective derived from special circumstances involving great sacrifice? I think so. This is why today I am grateful to have had the experience. For studying the subtleties of familial energies revealed to me glimpses into the reality of reincarnation. These glimpses continue to develop into full-blown insights. It is a rare point of view, a somewhat detached perspective. It is from here that I study this ever-captivating phenomenon of nature. The adoption experience caused an inward turn. I internalized thoughts, questions, observations, and loss energies. For years, I was powerless with desire for information, while at the same time feeling somehow unworthy of it. Since external information wasn't an option and therapy not offered, my mind did what minds do in such predicaments. The energy had to find somewhere to go. And since I wasn't the type to act out, the only option was to go inward. And to my surprise, I found something there. Within my mind and inner feelings was a surprisingly pleasant sensation of self and a feeling of security. The feeling was one of a higher existence that felt deeply pleasant. I questioned everything about myself. My psychic attitude was one of, well, if I'm out here in the world on my own with no kinfolk to be absorbed in, I will look and see what is inside of me and what is inside traditional families. They were a mystery to me, fascinating to me. Being separated genetically was like suddenly losing power and the TV goes off. The distraction becomes unavailable to the mind. The mind is compelled only because it has no choice to turn in on itself to find something else to do. It begrudgingly must find what is in it that is novel, entertaining, and fulfilling. Part of my consciousness was given a great opportunity, but the cost was a brutal loss that had to occur as soon as I made my entrance into this life. But the gift was worth the ordeal. To contemplate family, reincarnation, attachment, and loss, to seek association with the ultimate father and the ultimate mother has been worth the sacrifice. Time continues to grow within me the realization that I am not only this person or that person, daughter of him and her who belongs to this clan or that tribe. No, we all are something more. Devotional listening. The intensity of the Naad experience is not easy for everyone. Listening to a non-physical sound inside the head can seem like a strange project. The experience of the Naad sound was harder when I didn't know what it was. I figured I must have an abnormality. I wondered why my senses were turned on this way and why I had to be aware of this sound. It didn't seem as if anyone else heard it, at least no one mentioned it. For the last 3 years, now since I wrote this book, it's more like 6 years, I have been learning to sit and really listen. The reformation of my relationship with Naad has occurred because of what I have absorbed from my teacher, Michael Beloved. Through his in-self yoga instruction, I began to meditate on it, with it, consistently and with devotion. Devotional listening in meditation is so different than normal listening. Although I previously made an intellectual connection to what I heard in my head as being Naad sound, I still had no practical understanding of how to integrate its divine qualities. In-self yoga teaches techniques for internalization of interest so that Naad sound can be studied and experienced. Last section. I know this was long. This is my longest video ever. Description of Naad sound. Naad is like a hum or an endless om inside the inner ears and head. It can resonate with a high-pitched, full-bodied electrical drone. When I was young and didn't know what it was, it sounded as if I was hearing the radio frequency of life itself. I thought it was the hum of silence, but didn't take it seriously. In my ignorance, I had greatly underestimated the purpose of its presence. I was unaware of its higher qualities. What I understand now is that The Naad sound has always loved me, the core self. It has always been a friendly presence, whether I knew it consciously or not. It distracted me from mundane thoughts, shifting my awareness towards something mysterious. And it is my job as a yoga student to love Naad in return. So the second portion of this video will be shorter, and it will be a practice of actual Naad sound listening. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye.